Okay, we're on the morning break of the questioning of Graham Smith. Graham Smith was an active member of Hackney Community Defence Association, which was was reported on by 7 undercover police officers: Bob Lambert, John Dines, cover name Neil Richardson, cover name Kevin Douglas, Peter Francis, and Mark Jenner. It's only Mark Jenner that Graham Smith actually remembers. He's not sure if he ever met any of the others. We've gone through the formation and the early work and the early reports on Hackney Community Defence Association. I'm joined by Mark Metcalf, who gave evidence yesterday. Mark, what have you made of what we've heard from Graham Smith this morning over the last hour or so?
Well, as people might be aware, Graham actually set up the Hackney Community Defence Association, which was dedicated exclusively to supporting the victims of police crime. And I think he explains that very well. And I thought he'd get a bit more time to explain a little bit more about some of the cases that the HCDA was involved with, the witness searches, the working with the solicitors. That hasn't been, because that was a really brilliant organisation, which is why it came to the attention of the press in particular, and there's huge amounts of press publicity that took place, which helped raise the cases of people. Where it becomes a little bit murky is that the reporting on HCDA by the undercover police officers inaccurately misrepresents the organisation. It's referred to as anarchists.
Yeah, it's very directly, Bob Lambert, particularly in those early reports, he says that it's an anarchist front organisation that's been set up by Norman Blair. I think Graham Smith did a really good job of pointing out that obviously Norman Blair was in the target group that Bob Lambert was deployed to infiltrate at the time, and that it served his purposes to exaggerate the activities of his target group, basically saying that, laying whatever activities was happening in that area, any political activities, to his target group, so that he could make out that he was doing a good job of infiltrating the group that was doing the most activity in the area.
I think where this becomes, and it actually hasn't been raised yet, very difficult, is the situation is that HCDA gained so much press attention, and the people and the representatives and those that were shown on TV, the cases that were taken up with large numbers of black people as well, made it obvious to any passing person or anybody showing an interest that it was not an anarchist front organisation. It would have been impossible for senior managers, in my view, with even a modicum of sense, just a cursory glance across the papers on occasions, articles in The Guardian, in The Times, interviews on national television, to in any way consider that this was an anarchist front. The fact that they were allowed to continue to suggest that that was the case is because they sought to say, look, anarchists are against the system as such, and they felt that therefore would make it easier for Hackney Community Defence Association to be maligned. And the organisation itself consisted of people going to meetings and discussing their cases and trying to find some justice. A typical HCDA case would be somebody would be assaulted by the police and then subsequently charged with assault themselves. So any manager of the STS at this point, really, they would know that the reports which were being submitted to them were inaccurate. There's no question. These are not a situation where they would think, because it was just so high public profile. By 1994, the cases that they'd taken up, the TV coverage that was taken up, the number of times that Graham appeared on the television, particularly himself, this was national news that was taking place. Things were happening on a national news front in terms of the work of HCDA, and it was glaringly obvious that this was exclusively based on one organisation, and it was based also on the period of time in which police officers were ruthlessly exposed some of them themselves, as being involved in drug dealing themselves and running direct criminality, never mind the hidden criminality. There was TV programs eventually showing that they were involved in some very high profile importations and the selling of drugs. So even if it had been an anarchist organization, the fact that anybody was pointing these things out, if it had been the anarchists doing it, it would have still been legitimate political and activities and events. The fact was, nobody was being misused by Hackney Community Defence Association. There wasn't another group that they were being sent to, or people were being sent to afterwards. The majority of people, all of the people that came to the meetings were people who were involved in cases. I was a very close friend of Graham Smith, still am, and I supported the work of Hackney Community Defence Association. And they're saying that I'm an HCDA member. I wasn't an HCDA member, and I went to lots of events for HCDA. If there was a picket or there was a handout of leaflets or anything like that, I would support that work. But I had no role whatsoever in the organisation of HCDA or in the work that it did at its meetings and the research and the rest of it. I supported it, like did lots of people in Hackney.
We saw a bunch of SDS officers' reports that put the HCDA at places where, like anti-fascist mobilisations, organising meetings, claiming that they were essentially involved in all sorts of other sorts of political work, based on the fact that you were
dishonest reporting, because the people who were the cases that were taken up by, so as I mentioned in there, a lad called Gary. Gary was terrorized by the police. The last thing that he was wanting to do was to come on events where there was the potential for conflict with the police being there. People were scared, and they also felt some people felt humiliated as to what had happened to them. These were, in the case of some of the men who got beaten up by the police, they saw themselves as hard men. They saw themselves in the sense that they were working class, and they got severe beatings by the police. They found it difficult to talk about it, that the beating of them had taken away their self-respect as males in itself, and they didn't want any involvement with the police on any other events. They had been badly beaten, and their whole levels of self-respect had been removed. It was heroic that they came forward, but it was also because Graham and other people involved, Martin Walker, Russell Miller, Annette Monaville, loads of people who came forward, whose work, but particularly Graham, worked patiently with people to go through their cases, to talk through the cases, to convince them that what they had happened to them was not their fault. And he was able to do that because he'd had similar experiences when he was in Manchester. So he drew on his own experiences. Diligent. I mean, I'd go around his house. Their meetings would be on 9:30. I'd go around his house, and we were supposed to go for a beer, and we'd go out at like 11:15 because he'll have spent another hour and a quarter listening to people, talking to people, and the sorts of things. So 9 times out of 10, I would end up going for a drink with his girlfriend because he just didn't have the time to deal with it.
We've only got a short break. Proceedings have restarted, so we're going to go back in. Thanks for joining us. We'll be doing another video at lunchtime. Cheers for now.
Okay. Hope that was